Welcome everyone. We were just waiting some minutes for the people get connected, but I think we can start this session. And I wanted to introduce Fabiana Lopez Rocha, which is the head officer for the CSS Brazil, the Center for Species Survival in Brazil. This is a model that we, within the Species Survival Commission, we are developing with some partners around the world. She will talk about the model a little bit more in a bit, but I just wanted to introduce her and then to say thanks to her for being here. And this is one session that is part of a series of sessions that we have been having in this summit. So we are really thankful for being here and for having the opportunity to share our model with you all. So thank you and welcome everyone. And Fabiana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And thank you, Maggie, Megan, Ash, and the others for joining us. And Maggie, by the way, I think what you started talking, I think it's a lot to do with this, and maybe having a center for species surviving in Peru can be one of the things forward about what we were just discussing. So the idea is to present the Center for Species Survival Brazil, and as a model, we want to present the work we are doing here in Brazil, but also as a way forward for other countries or other institutions as a model for improving and boosting species conservation efforts in your own country. I would like to start by talking just a little and very quickly about the context and the motivation for the creation of the center. And of course, that this context is the biodiversity crisis. The environment is being degraded at an unprecedented rate, and the number of threatened species grows every year, and we are experiencing the emergence of species, as you all know that. About a third of the species assessed on the IUCN Global Red List are threatened with extinction. And if we want to change this situation, we need a systemic change in our approach and scale of action. But the good news is that we know that conservation works. Species can recover. A study published last year assessed how many birds and mammals extinctions were prevented by conservation actions from 1993 to 2010, and the authors concluded that extinctions rates would be 3-4 times higher without conservation actions. And some of the success stories mentioned in this article are from our Brazilian fauna, such as the golden lion tamarins, the black lion tamarins, the Lagoa entrans, the Spix macaws, among others. Another great example was given by the Conservation Planning Specialist Group. They published a book called Second Nature, and they talk about 10 success stories of species recovery. And we know that species can recover even faster, even better, and more efficiently with science-based, stakeholder-inclusive and participatory conservation planning. A review from more than 200 conservation projects showed a significant trend of improvement of species decline trajectory after a planning workshop. So it seems that if you do a conservation planning workshop, after that species will have a trend to recover and recover fast. So we know that conservation works, but we need to do much more. And that is the scenario where the IUCN Species Survival Commission initiated the global movement Reverse the Red. This is a strategy to unite tools and partnerships to catalyze conservation efforts and support countries in delivering their conservation targets. IUCN and several other organizations, they have excellent toolkits to save species. There are great solutions out there, and I am sure you must have seen some of them in other sessions of this event. And so we know how to save species. But what we need is to integrate, to share, and to scale our conservation efforts. IUCN Species Survival Commission now has made this call to institutions that want to partnership with this movement, the Reverse the Red movement. And now we currently have 8 centers for species survival around the world in 7 countries, plus the Global Center of Species Survival from Indianapolis Zoos in the United States. And here in Brazil, Parque das Aves was the institution that attended this call. So we had almost a year of negotiations discussing, trying to think on a strategy that would align with our host institution and would align with the current structures we have in Brazil. And so in 2019, we launched the center as a union of 3 partners, the Species Survival Commission, the Conservation Planning Specialist Group, which worked already in Brazil since 2004, and Parque das Aves, which is our host institution. And as Naomi just mentioned, that they have these previous sessions around the general strategy of the Reverse the Red. So this movement is in the phase 1 of selecting pilot countries and institutions to join it. And so why they selected Brazil? Why Brazil? First, because we have historical leadership as key actors in the proposition and negotiations of work programs on the Convention on Biological Diversity, and mainly because we are one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, including many species that occur only in Brazil. And we must protect our species, but we have big conservation challenges, just like other countries, such as increased deforestation, wildfires. We are experiencing a current change in our environmental policies, among many others. Indeed, for some important environmental themes, the Latin America's largest country has gone from environmental championship to antagonist. And unfortunately, we are not alone on this direction. So the first question is, how do we collectively design a species survival center that is functional, pragmatic, respectful, and strategic for Brazil? I'm sorry, I don't know, the computer just turned back some slides. And the fact is that Brazil has indeed an excellent conservation apparatus, including the assessment of species extinction and conservation planning as public policies. So we can be proud of that because we know that many countries here in Latin America and elsewhere doesn't have it as a public policy. coordinated by the government. And we have this formidable conservation culture. So instead of bringing this closed package, the first thing we have taken a careful look to understand what already exists in Brazil, to understand how these institutions work. And so we could fill the gaps where needed and then start working for capacity building and providing support to the country. So we need to add and not overlap, and that's why we took a while to develop our strategy for Brazil. And the center works through the species conservation cycle for the SSC. And this means first step is to assess the risk of extinction of a species. So we need to proactively identify species that require protagonism. So we must first try to understand who needs help. And then we have to plan for effective conservation action. So you can do actions that are really effective and that are really built upon a community of people around it. And the planning process is not just about being effective, but also about having a community together to save a species. Let's talk about our strategies to the access component. So regarding the access, in the case of our center, and this is important that I mentioned that each center works a bit differently. Some of our centers for species survival are more focusing on doing red listing itself. Others can do more planning. So the idea of a center is not they will be all equal, but just the opposite. You have to see what are the needs in the country and then you develop your strategy. In the case of Brazil, since we already have the national red list, so we want to integrate the national red list with the global red list. I will explain why in a few minutes. And also build capacity so we can scale the number of species being assessed. And the IUCN Global Red List is recognized as the world's most comprehensive information source on the global extinction risk status. So far, we have almost 150,000 species assessed. And the target for these years is to assess over 12,000 species more. And we are almost in the end of the year, so we have a lot of work to do. But this still represents only 7% of the world's described species. So imagine if we really want to assess what is the biodiversity risk, we have to do much more of it. And to do that, we need to increase the number of experts trained to carry out the IUCN Red List assessments and also increase the number of species assessed every year. And what Brazil has the potential to contribute. Well, Brazil has this well-established structure assessment. So we have the national red list both for fauna and for flora. They are coordinated by our environmental agencies, the ICMBio for fauna and the Botanical Garden for flora. And they follow the same methodology and the same process, all the same steps as IUCN Global Red List. Just for you to have an idea, ICMBio, regarding the fauna assessments, ICMBio has assessed over 15,000 species. And of them, 60,000 species are native to Brazil. That means that their national status should be, and categories should be the same in the global red list because they are endemic to Brazil. But 77% of the species that are already assessed nationally are not yet in the global red list. And this is because there was no mechanism of integration of those lists. And these are not just numbers. If a species appears on the global list, it gains visibility, both national and international, and allow them to become objects of international conservation, international efforts. And for those that are already assessed both globally and nationally, a lot of them have discrepant categories. This means that sometimes it is considered threatened globally, but not nationally, or the other way. And this means that there is a big gap of information between those lists. Sometimes it's in Brazil, the gap of information, sometimes it's outside. But the fact is we should align those processes so we have the better information for the species and they have all the same category, both nationally and internationally. If they are native to Brazil, they shouldn't have different categories here. So what we want with this strategy is to contribute to the information in the global red list. We have to have more Brazilians involved. ICMBio and the Botanical Garden, they do the assessments through workshops with specialists. So we have over 2,000 Brazilian specialists that contributes to the national red list, and we could give voice to them. And we want to eliminate duplicate efforts. If we want to have a lot of species access, why we would have two different institutions doing the same instead of doing different species and having more species assessed? We don't want to have discrepant results, and we want the integration of information. So our objectives is to do this, intermediate the integration of results, support the official national red list by improving it, building capacity, improving the methodology here, to promote greater participation of IUCN members in Brazil and in the other way around, and also to train more people in the red list method, so we can have more access. And to do this, one of the first things we did was to negotiate a cooperation agreement that would allow the exchange of information between the global IUCN red list and the national red list. And we started that as soon as the center was launched, also to understand the main structure and how we could have synergies. And this was just before the pandemic, so we were lucky to have this first initial meeting, and this was financed by ICMBio, which brought all the red list coordinators of the different taxonomic groups. But after this, it took us 2 years of negotiating to reach a final agreement, which we did it. So in March this year, we had this agreement that we can now integrate the national red list with the global red list. And we have a formal way to do that. This agreement also includes the planning component for both capacity building and collaborating, but I will talk about this when we go to the planning component. So after the cooperation agreement, the second step was to build capacity and to train. So we have provided training to all of the national officers that are involved in the national red list. So they are updated with the last guidelines or last published guidelines of IUCN. And we are now expanding this to the Brazilian states. So this year we are going to be training officers from 8 Brazilian states together with the Botanical Garden and ICMBio. So now it's a joint effort to train all the Brazilian states. We have this deal of doing this in the next 2 years. And now in the practical side of the integration, because first step is to have an agreement that allow you to do that, but then you have to align all the process, all the timing, all the workflow. So this is a long process. One of the steps is to integrate the systems, because here in Brazil we have a different system than the IUCN system. So we submitted and were awarded with a grant together with ICMBio and the Botanical Garden to improve the system. And now the system is ready because our system had different fields. So we redesigned the Brazilian system to match the IUCN global system, and now they can talk automatically, which is a great advance in this integration. And another thing is to the language barrier. So both for the training, for having new people, to build capacity for the states and for the officers, of course, language is a big barrier. So we are working for the translation of all red list materials, and we already finished the main guidelines, the red list online course. They are already translated to Portuguese, and this can also be used by other countries that speak Portuguese as well. And now we got a new funding, and from the Ministry of Environment, this was a big achievement, because now that they understood that this translation and this partnership is working well. The Ministry of Environment is funding the continuation of this process. So the previous grant was, we submitted it, but now that grant allows us just the guidelines and the IUCN Red List online course. But now through this project, Pro Species, we are translating all the Red List materials, all of them complete. And it will be ready in the beginning of next year. So it's ongoing now. Well, now we are going towards this integration. So we expect we are all aligned in terms of methodology. We have an agreement in place so they can be integrated. The system is working, and we are working on the translations to remove the barrier. But now we still have to work on the workflow, because the timing of different institutions and a lot of small details, but I think we have great advances in less than 3 years of a new center in a country. And now that we have identified the species, and we will continue doing this to improve and increase the number of Brazilian species in the global red list and also in the national red list, we have to plan for those that are considered threatened by extinction. So what we want is that every Brazilian species that needs a plan, they are supported by an effective and implemented plan. And our planning component is led by the Conservation Planning Specialist Group. Parque das Aves was already the host of CPSG in Brazil, and CPSG has operated in Brazil since 2004, but now with the center, it's expanding its capacity, not just in Brazil, but also in collaboration with other South American countries. And CPSG mission is to save threatened species by increasing the effectiveness of conservation efforts. And we do that by designing and facilitating conservation planning workshops, by designing and implementing science-based tools for conservation planning, and by training people to apply these tools. So we design workshops and facilitate workshops, national, regional, abroad, in person, virtual, and hybrid, and always based on the CPSG principles and steps. You can find this document in CPSG website. It gives the basis for a conservation planning work and the principles that you have to apply to all species. And since the launch of the center in 2019, we have designed and facilitated 18 workshops for 83 species in 9 countries. I will not talk about each of them, but just for you to have a general idea. And Maggie, you are from Peru, so in 2019, we facilitated a humboldt penguin a viability population assessment there. But we also work with very different species, since a tiny species like the dove, that it's only 12 individuals in the world, to big species as the jaguar, as the macaw. And in 2020, the pandemic came, and we adapted really fast for the virtual workshops. And in fact, of course, they has these cons, but we learned a lot, and now we can do much more workshops because of the virtual facilitation of doing this, facilities of doing this. So we are now doing both virtual, hybrid, and in-person workshops, and between different countries in South America. So 2021, we worked with primates, managed sloth, dolphins, cherry-throated tanagers, and others. And this year, we are working with RP eagle, with cactuses species in Chile, lyre macaw, giant otters, and so on. In Brazil, we have been working in a different way from the work we do for other countries, because in Brazil, because of that agreement that I mentioned, we are trying to work always in collaboration with the National Action Plan. So the National Action Plans, they are more general for a taxa. So they have, for instance, a National Action Plan for birds of Atlantic forest. This means almost 100 species included. So it's a more broad and general strategy. So they identified some of the gaps or some species that really need a species-specific plan, or a different type of plan. For instance, if they need a modeling for one species to assess the impact of a wind farm, or to assess an impact of traffic, or if they need ex situ assessment, one plan approach. So depending on the needs, we go and work in partnership with the National Action Plan to provide this feedback. And then after the workshop, it comes back to the National Action Plan so it can become policies. But a conservation planning process is more than the plan itself. In fact, as I mentioned in the beginning, when you do a conservation plan, the trajectory of the species tends to change, to improve. And this happens because in these planning workshops, you create a community. So people feel, if you go to a workshop like this, when it's finished, you are ready to go to action. So it ignites a lot of enthusiasm around the species, and also a lot of partnership, a lot of agreements, and people feel protagonists of the species. They feel the responsibility of taking care of one species. So doing a plan is not beyond the plan, because what the consequences of a planning process is much further than the document and the planning itself. It generates direction to research, strategic direction to actions, and much more. And we also work with capacity building for conservation planning. So we have invested in bringing the main CPSG tools to Brazil, the modeling tools, the process tools. So we have specific tools, for instance, to address the disease risk or to address if one species need an ex situ program and so on, or a modeling for viability of the species. And we also have a mentoring program, including people from all over the world. Well, now we talked about, we identified the species that needs attention in the first step, and then we start planning for the species, but we have a lot of plan to do because we have much more species that needs attention that we have planned so far. So we can really have help and have a lot of people collaborating in producing strategic planning for species. And we also need to get these plans and put them to be implemented and really become actions. So in the ACT component, of course, we always, there is always a promotion of actions in the workshops, but from our center, Parque das Aves, our host institution, is committed to fostering and executing the actions that are focusing on the birds from the Atlantic forest. And that's why, because we are seeing the extinction crisis of the birds of the Atlantic forest. We have seen several extinctions in the recent years, over 30 critically endangered taxa in the National Red List. And many of them, they are not targets for any conservation actions. So Parque das Aves is committed to provide actions to those species. So we have our flagship project, that is the birds of the Atlantic forest. And specifically for the birds, we have done an assessment and also the discrepancy assessments with the global red list. So now they are much more aligned. So we have been working, coordinating this integration of the national red list and the global red list more intensively for the birds. And then Parque das Aves funded 7 workshops targeting some of those 120 species. So far we have already planned workshops for 19 species and modeling workshops for 7 species. And Parque das Aves, together with other partner organizations, are executing field actions, creating ex situ populations, reoriented the reintroduction process. So we do the assess, we do the plan, and Parque das Aves will foster or execute with their staff the actions for those selected species. Just to give some examples of species we have been working in these 3 years. 2 of them are the Alagoas entering. When we did the planning, they have just 12 known individuals, and the blue eyes ground dove, just 14 known individuals. Now they are in a new reserve. They have their own team working with them. We are doing a lot of intensive management actions, and the results of this workshop is already part of the national action plan, so they become part of the national policy as well. The cherry-throated tanager, it's another species, just less than 20 individuals in the world. And after the workshop, we secured funding to buy the area where these individuals were there. So now it's a private reserve, and that came from the international attention that the species gained through the workshop. We have secured a field team to monitor the species, and they now founded and are protecting these new nests. And although they are still super threatened, but now the population is increasing from 12 to 17 individuals in this first reproduction after the workshop. We also did an ex situ assessments for integrated conservation planning for 10 species of galliforms and 24 in tinamiforms, sorry. And now the ones that in the workshop were determined that they need a security ex situ population or they need to be reproduced ex situ. So now Parque das Aves is carrying out the recommendations that were appeared from the workshop. And an example of the black-fronted pimping one. And so Parque das Aves is reproducing them, and now they are being, last year they were released, 11 of them were released as part of the collaboration of Parque das Aves and Save Brasil. And this new species, there was no non-representative of this species in ex situ, and it's also a critically endangered species. So now they are doing intensive management strategies. They are getting the eggs, putting in the ex situ, reproducing the species, putting back to the nature, and also trying to build ex situ population for a security ex situ population. And other species, many more projects. But of course, Parque das Aves is not doing this together. Every workshops, we have a lot of collaboration from the center of the National Center for Birds, the SEMAV in Brazil, Save Brasil, Papagaios do Brasil. The fact is, when you start this process, doing together, you start a collaboration, a community around the species, and they can all be protagonists of the actions for saving those species. And the last two components of the species conservation cycle is network and communicate. And we have been doing this through our social medias and websites, so you can access scientific publication, workshop reports, guidelines, and recommendations. We are always trying to spread the species agenda and increase the knowledge of the species through interviews, webinars, printed and digital medias. This is just for you to put some faces in this word. So this is some of our leaders from CPSG Brazil, from Parque das Aves, from the center officers. But in fact, we are many, many more, because each project, each planning, which access process, which each act process, program, and project, they have a big team. So we are many more, and we need to be many, many more in Brazil and in the other countries as well. Summarizing some of the conclusions of this, connecting national and international communities is really a very efficient and necessary thing to do at this time. But always with a careful look at existing structures, we need to add, not overlap. And for instance, if we had started in Brazil trying to do again red list, or trying to do a national action plan for species that already exist, or any other strategy that overlap, that success we would be duplicating efforts, and sometimes it would be much more difficult to integrate the international and national strategies. But if you come to a country, you look what is there, you fill the gaps, and then you start your work, then it's when things start to work well and increase and build capacity. A national center for species survival will create culture, create community, and thereby organic and exponential capacity to grow. And then the idea of this talk is to give the example of Brazil, that a Center for Species Survival can be a species conservation powerhouse. But we have to do this in many countries. So IUCN is open, has opened this call to several institutions. So if you have an institution that wants to support a Center for Species Survival or wants to host a Center for Species Survival, you can contact us, contact Naomi. And that was the idea, to give our examples from the way we are working in Brazil, and also promote these Centers for Species Survival as a model for boosting species conservation everywhere. Thank you. If you want to ask questions, any questions or comments? Naomi?
Thank you, Fabiana. I don't know if anyone from the attendees have any questions or comment to add. I think as we are a small group, we can allow them just to open the mic and say what or ask what they need to ask. Otherwise, I think we finished. Thanks so much, Fabiana, for this excellent explanation about how this model is working, especially in Latin America, where we are doing a great, well, you are doing a great job. We earlier today, we have another session about the Argentinian Center. So we wanted to show you how this is working in some countries, especially in Latin America, in the framework of this summit. But we have so many other centers that are doing a great job around the world, around 10 centers, and others that are coming. So the idea is to expand our capacity to assess, plan, act, and save species for us to be able to reverse the red, which is our main goal for this movement. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and especially Fabiana for these excellent talks today. Thanks.
Thank you all.